Stephanie, Morningstar. I'll start with Stephanie. Stephanie is a healer, an herbalist, a gardener, a farmer, an academic, and is just absolutely knowledgeable about multiple numbers of ways of talking about and understanding this deep relationship to land. And when I look at Çaca, I think of someone who is a poet, a philosopher, an extraordinary astrologer, and I hope that you and Sherry get some time together, a new dad, and which I know is important to him and his family, and is bringing all of that into, again, how can we understand this important relationship that we have to land, to the cosmos, and to each other. So I'm hoping that they will also tell you more about themselves, but I hope you will join me in welcoming tonight and into our community our keynote speakers. Thank you.
Good evening. Oh, no, that's good. Good evening, everyone.
Wow. Well, that was a pretty fabulous intro. And I have to say, I think I feel really welcome here. And Çaca and I have been preparing this for months. And Chet probably wrote it like 5 times. So I'm so grateful to have heard the words of the Governor General tonight and to have met you wherever you are earlier tonight. The metaphors that you're pulling forward are absolutely essential in the way that the work that we do, for sure. It's just been a real interesting ride to go through. This is really, I think, the culmination for us of a year of building a land trust together and building relationship with one another. And it's been just a really joyful ride, but also a ride full of grief. So this is where we come to right now, is we're coming from a place of grief. And I want to, so the way that this is working mainly is that Çaca and I have separate pieces that we're going to be presenting. So do you mind minding the slides? And I will try to not cry while I do this. I want to say thank you so much to Thea and Raphael for the patience and the perseverance for getting us here, and for Amanda and Mandana for bringing the In Living Color space here, and for Mama for advocating for that, Mama Claudia, for Alicia for bringing our beautiful Thanksgiving address here, for all the new friends that I've met since I've come. I feel so welcome. And I'm so glad that you made it here safely and that the baby is here and all is well now. So I'm going to start with a piece that really evokes, I feel like, where we want to start out tonight. And I'm trying to be very mindful of time. We have 45 minutes, right? Okay. This is called The Peace of Wild Things by Wendell Berry. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time I rest in the grace of the world, and I'm free. How do we step into the collective good mind so we can move into the experience of this conference together and ultimately out into the world, anchored from that place, in a world where each day we're witnessing a slowly approaching tidal wave of irreversible and terrifying destruction, devastation, and inhumanity? How can we gather our minds together as one to participate in the ages-old oral histories, reminders of our original instructions, like the Ohando Gali de Lekwa that we just heard, while navigating collective grief as we hold our breath for a miracle? How do we take the deep, incomprehensible grief we hold from our collective ancestral wounds, whether oppressor or oppressed, and reach a place where we can unburden our minds enough for a synergy to manifest between our communities, nations, and all of creation? If there were ever a time that synergy between humans, non-humans, and the earth could mutually benefit from each other's health and well-being, it's now. Ecological grief, environmental destruction, ever-present war, humans hurting humans for arbitrary constructions like race and gender. How did we get to this place? Better question, how do we repair our relationships with the land and within our own social constellations so that we can leverage our collective power in such an essential time in the evolving story of our Earth? I felt the sandpaper roughness of her huge paw and heard the hollow clicking of her nails as they enfolded me in a furry embrace. Their soft fur blanketed me in unsettling warmth and cocooned me first in terror, then in safety and awe. Eventually, my breath met theirs, steady and rhythmic, heartbeat stabilizing, entrancing. The idea of being hugged by a bear normalized for a moment, and that seemed pretty eternal for a moment. I felt protected, loved, held, and while the whole room filled up with her spirit, she took up every inch of space, every millimeter, every atom, every bit of dark matter, their essence filling mine and shining light into the cracks of my weary, grief-stricken soul. We lay there like that, great bear surrounding my comparatively tiny and fragile body, until I drifted to sleep. In my vision, I was handed a seed. I swallowed it and I woke up, activated to step into my grief. This is the moment that I woke up. Not from any old dream, but from the American dream. I don't often speak of this vision, but I bring it to you here today because I want you to wake up from the American dream too. At least the old one that's built on the backs of those that it has erased, the soil in which the blood and bones of my ancestors reside. This is the moment we can choose to step into our ancestor work and dream into a new, regenerative, equitable reality together. When Saka and I were first asked to give this opening keynote address, we're not. Oh, how about before we even go any further, yeah, that's a good idea. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves in this, I want everybody here to be doing this ancestor work with us. This is something that Saka and I do at a lot of our presentations, and I can feel it already, but and I can feel my ancestors with me. I wanted to share with you who these folks are, and Saka will share who this person is in the center. So on your far left-hand side is my great-great-grandfather. His name is Thomas Newton Schuler. He was a black farmer, black in Lenape. And he has been lost to time and erased to history in my family because they cannot admit that there is any blackness in our family. And that's something you often see in our indigenous communities. but we have such a deep, intricately tied together, bound together reality and history. And on the other side are my grandfather and my grandmother and my mom's family. And they're holding my Uncle Cubby there, my Uncle Bucky. So I'm calling them in. That's Thomas Newton Schuler, Cub Schuler, Fran Schuler.
The gentleman in the center is Marshal Çaca. He is my great-great-grandfather. Perhaps the sole patriarch where we see 3 lineages join and 3 traditions continue and rage very strongly. I'd be calling him in tonight.
So we're inviting you right now to just summon up in your spirit, in your heart, somebody that you feel is already with you here tonight. Somebody that maybe you might not even want to admit is a part of your family or your lineage. Somebody who needs to hear this message, maybe. Somebody you want to be here to feel consoled or activated or present in joy. And at the count of 3, I'm going to invite you to call their name out. 1, 2, 3.
Thomas
Elsie.
Farr.
Wow, the room got a lot fuller. Thank you. So when Saka and I were asked to give this opening keynote, we were both really perplexed as to why would somebody like me, an indigenous herbalist and earth worker, and somebody like Saka, a sovereign poet, designer, tracker, neither of whom practice by the book Biodynamics. How do we feel it's appropriate to stand here before you, a community that we haven't really been a part of until just now, in a good way, in a way where we could actually start off this conference and activate you into a joyful space, into a space of celebration, a space that is evoking the sort of theme that was pulled together this year. We were really perplexed about that. You know, we want to be able to get you pumped up for this. We want to take you to church in a way that will rally the collective energies you have here and leave feeling like something that expands outside of yourself or individual dreams. Saka and I have been chewing on this for months. We were invited in May, and this is the last big presentation we're giving for the year. And I think it's the one we've probably debated on and written and then overwritten and rewritten and thrown it all out and started all from scratch maybe 4 or 5 times. So we've been chewing on this for months and really studying up on Steiner and learning about the preparations and compost and the individuality of the biodynamic farm system and all the amazing things that go into, you know, the ecological benefits and the carbon sinking, and it's really fantastic, and it's all really amazing, and it's all really great, and apparently highly effective as a sustainable and connected way to be in relationship with the land, spirit, and each other. So I applaud you for that. I think that's why we're here. It was in this studying that I started to see some patterns forming: land, relationship, community, healing, cosmic constructions, holism, spirit. These are the same patterns in my life and in my community's lives. I found many things we have in common, but was still perplexed, still a little bit like, why do they want us to come? We're not experts in biodynamics. What does biodynamics have to do with us, 2 people of color working to advance land and food sovereignty, specifically for Black and brown folks? What does identity have to do with the rallying of the biodynamic community together at the beginning of your annual celebration and convening? Why the land acknowledgement? Why the in living color space? Why the social justice track? And why the pushback? What do we all have in common? And then it hit me. We're all working to heal the land and ultimately to preserve the sacredness of it and our responsibility to it and to one another. Lately, the conversations I have with folks about land are either about our deep desire to live on land, with land, in a regenerative way, that will feed and heal our communities and move towards self-determination, or we talk about our collective grief as we experience the current climate crisis, what is being labeled the 6th mass extinction. The common threads weaving these conversations together are land, and a desire to heal, and grief. Grief for what our ancestors lost, or for the harm that they caused. Grief for our planet, and the part we've all played in its destruction. Grief for what our children and our children's children may have to experience. There hasn't been a week that has passed lately for me. Maybe within the past 2 years, when the intense reality of where we are and when we are in relation to climate change hasn't hit me like a Mack truck carrying a ton of bricks that just fell out of the sky. We're having conversations together now that result in tears, anxiety, depression, and even PTSD. So much so that the powers that be gave it a new name, eco-grief. I'm standing before you today, a human being who knows grief intimately. If we're lucky enough to have lost something or someone well-loved, be it quick and painful or slow and creeping, we all know that intimacy. Grief can feel that way, it can feel intimate. Like no one ever fully can understand the depth of our loss, and they really can't. Yet it is a universal experience. It's something that can only emerge if we were once connected to something. Grief is not an individual journey. It's a common experience that binds us together, and if left unhealed, it can burden our minds, leaving us unable to see one another or be of any service to anybody else. Grief manifests in mists and shadows, ruptures and fading, flashes and searing pain, but it's always ascribed to loss of a person, of a community, of hope, of old realities, loss of anything we hold dear. It's not meant to be chronic. And like any wound left unattended, ignored, or healed over the surface can create systemic infection, sepsis, and even death. For months to years to generations, grief can pass down through blood, song, and stories, and intuitive memory that weaves into century after century. War, colonization, the extinction of hundreds of species, the wrongs done to the land out of greed that are irreversible. These collective griefs are difficult to forget, burdening our minds so much that we can barely see beyond our own experience, let alone see each other, or even ourselves. I learned a lot about Steiner during this research phase. I learned he was just prolific. The man was like kind of a little bit of a mad genius. Insightful, powerful. He had the capacity to shape multiple movements, all rooted in the unique way he saw the world, the universe, and spirit realms, and our place in all of it. I learned he was a sculptor, an artist, a farmer, an alchemist, an educator, and even an architect. He was constantly in connection with creation and constantly creating. He was also a man of his time. We don't often meet eye to eye on some of his more esoteric writings and some of his writings about race. But ultimately, this dude was really onto something. And I have to say, like, I'm pretty blown away by what I've learned about anthroposophy and biodynamic since I've been doing this work. I may even get some preparations. One piece of wisdom I fell upon in his work was that in order to be spiritually and morally prepared, he suggests that before we take one step towards knowledge or power, take 2 steps towards ethics. He also posited that as we embark upon this path of higher knowledge, we will have to pass the guardians of the threshold, an archetypal and menacing figure who stands between the physical and spiritual worlds. Confrontation with this guardian is necessary in order to achieve a spiritual initiation. In order to achieve this initiation, to open up to one's spirit, one's psychic abilities, we have to confront our shadows. Guardians are our own dark side. This is a theme that is played out in various spiritualities around the globe. I've been introduced to this in other ways. But it certainly is a theme that has been woven through the thread of spirit in general. For example, the Rosicrucians, when going through initiation, are brought into a small room and are confronted with a mirror, actually, that they must look into so that you can see yourself more deeply. In these circumstances, we confront the things that we don't normally see in ourselves or want to see in ourselves: selfishness, greed, avarice, gluttony, violence, anger, dark histories that we don't want to claim, ancestral suffering we don't want to revisit. In order for us to take in the pain of the world, we need to take in our own pain. If we're to confront the lesser or greater guardian, what would it look like for yourself right now? If you were to look into that mirror right now, what would you see? Look at something pretty for a while so that you're not all depressed. Because it's going to get a little real. So, eco-grief, that's really, for me, when we're thinking about what do we all have in common? What are we all carrying? What are we all holding? The first thing that comes up for me is ecological grief. It weaves itself into every conversation I've had with anybody who works on the land, who works with the land. When I'm Zoom calling Mama Claudia or Amanda or Saka, there are many times where I'm in tears, and that's a real thing. I don't know how many of you are often feeling it the same way, but ecological grief is grief. It's a grief of pain and sadness and suffering that people identify as experiencing when they lose a beloved ecosystem, species, or place. We've lost 322 species since, I think it was, I don't have it right here in front of me, but I think it was around 1950. At least since the Industrial Revolution. It's grief that situates us within the environments and within the ecosystems in which we live, and which we need for our overall health, our wellness, our cultural identities, and our overall mental health. And if we can't be well in our minds, how are we going to go out there in the world and function? Not only just in our daily lives with one another, but just how do we plant? How are we going to achieve it? In my tradition, you have to be in a good mind to touch anything that you're eating, that you're making medicine, if you're cooking food. You have to be in a good mind. You can't be burdened. Your mind can't be burdened with anything. I mean, there's a place for grief, but as I said, it's not meant to be a chronic condition. And we are living in, together, a chronic condition of grief right now. We're slowly watching our world fall apart, and we're so distanced from, as the Governor General said, from the political environment that actually is controlling the way that this works, that I think oftentimes we just feel helpless and try to do our own little part in our own little world. And that's one of the reasons that I love the idea of biodynamics. And I think that, after all the research that I've done on it, I see it as a really wonderful solution to sinking carbon into the soil. And really, it's a metaphor in a lot of ways for the way that we need to treat one another. 1 in 6 survivors of Hurricane Katrina met the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder, and crop-damaging heat waves have been shown to lead to the increased suicide rates in India, farmers in India. So much so that they're actually creating major